Back in my day, there was enough Republicans in most cases that a handful of moderate Democrats could advance or stop legislation. Today, that group of moderate Democrats is almost pushed over into a corner with a lot of the Republicans.
Former Mayor of Anaheim and former California Assembly Speaker,
Curt Pringle.
That's how the Democrats and at least Governor Newsom have been managing the state over the last 7 years in this case. And that is, it is always the furthest left philosophy of America that's being espoused here.
Curt Pringle, welcome to State of Gold.
Thank you.
It's great to be here in your office in Anaheim,
Yep.
a city that you've helped build over the years.
I had my part
in a major way. Well, you built a lot of housing.
Yep, that's right.
Which is a major opportunity issue for California. But I want to start by asking you about Mr. Speaker and Mr. Mayor. You've held big jobs at the state level, Speaker of the Assembly and Mayor of Anaheim, one of the major cities, iconic cities in California. What did you learn about California politics?
Well, the battle of California politics has always been going on, and we somehow only view it in the context in which we currently are in. So that is with a Democrat supermajority. But 7 of the 8 years I was in the state assembly, I was in the minority. And one thing that's really important is to have a strong governor, and a governor that stands up firm on principles. Particularly when there's someone like George Majan or Pete Wilson, people who some may not remember, but were very strong and valued governors that really led the way.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you got to love being the speaker when you run everything and you're able to monitor all that happens. But sometimes, it's not necessarily advancing your philosophy. It's really understanding where the state is and advancing what's best for the state at that time. I saw that with Willie Brown, and I certainly had to live to that when I was speaker.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Willie Brown. I lived in San Francisco for a while. Willie Brown's one of the iconic guys in California politics.
Yep.
I gather you were a very young speaker, and you would travel to San Francisco to seek his counsel. What did you learn from him?
Well, a lot more than people would imagine. I mean, Willie Brown is kind of reflective in my life in a lot of ways. I mean, he really worked hard to make sure I didn't get elected in the first place, because I was elected to a very Democrat seat
Right.
in my first election and then lost in that seat in my reelection to that. But also Willie Brown was a Speaker of the Assembly who then ran and became mayor of a major city. I think he was the first in the state that ever did that, and I was the second. So there is some followers. And then Antonio Villaraigosa and now Karen Bass. But the point of the matter is he was really studied and understood how the process worked, how the institution worked. And I went over there about once a month when I was speaker to San Francisco to have lunch with him at the Four Seasons so that I could hear his wisdom and, the things that I needed to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that have that image of the Four Seasons on Market Street, which is a stretch of the city that's not that great.
Yeah.
So,
well, back in the 90s, it was very nice.
It was new and it was nice.
Right.
Is there a pearl of wisdom he gave you that has stuck with you in your career?
Probably quite a few. And I asked him one question once that was, you could, as Speaker of the Assembly, you really control every bill moving in or out of your house. And I asked him, how much are those critical bills reflective of his philosophy? I mean, what percentage does he control to advance his philosophy?
Mm.
And he looked at me and said, maybe 50%. So for me as a new speaker, thinking, okay, the all-powerful 15-year run speakership of Willie Brown, he should be able to control everything, and it always advanced his philosophy, but he didn't. And then he proceeded to tell me a litany of reasons why that wasn't necessary or shouldn't be the focus. And it was mainly because you try to keep the organization together, in terms of supporting other members of your caucus or supporting the minority membership sometimes, or not wasting your energy on things that may not be the critical path.
Right. Well, he's certainly known as a transactional deal maker. So it sounds like he kept a few chits in his pocket to get things done,
exactly.
Which is the art of compromise in politics, I guess. So Robert Rivas, How would you rate him?
Oh, I don't know. I guess I don't pay as keen attention to how the assembly operates today as it did before. Um, but it's a totally different legislative body when you have a supermajority of
Mhm.
folks on your side. I mean, back in my day, there was enough Republicans in most cases that a handful of moderate Democrats could advance or stop legislation. Today, that group of moderate Democrats is almost pushed over into a corner with a lot of the Republicans
Right.
in terms of saying, no, this is a much more liberal body with a liberal focus.
Mm.
And therefore, you don't necessarily need to compromise. You don't need to compromise on a budget or work together on a budget.
Right.
Back in my time, I think it was one of the worst mistakes the state has ever made, and that shifting from a supermajority, a two-thirds budget, to a simple majority, just one more over the middle.
Mhm.
And by doing that, you don't really need folks with different philosophies. You just can ram through what you want with a simple majority, particularly when Democrats have, so many members.
Right. Right. It's a shame.
Yeah.
Which is a great segue to just talk about California politics 2025.
Mm.
And we are very close to 2026, and we're going to turn over all these constitutional offices. You've got this experience all across the state, Sacramento to Orange County. How do we get things working again in California?
Mm.
We have so many problems, so many problems. We're the worst in so many metrics in the United States. Are there a couple strategies you'd employ if you were advising the next governor
Mhm.
on getting California working again?
Yeah, that's rough. But I mean, I think the number one principle is you cannot govern from the edges. And if this was the shoe was on the other foot, and this was a very Republican state, I think there would be a lot of people in the Republican Party that says you don't have to always govern from the edge, from the political edge of your party. And to me, at least from my vantage point, that's how the Democrats and at least Governor Newsom have been managing the state over the last 7 years in this case. And that is, it is always the furthest left philosophy of America that's being espoused here, as opposed to how do you keep jobs here? How do you improve education? Listen to other people, other states, other educators who have different ideas than necessarily just the teachers union. Um, how do yeah, on social issues, if this were a Republican state and all that was focused on was right-leaning social issues, people would equally be concerned about the direction of California. So I feel that over the last few years, it has become more and more governing from the edges, from the extreme edge of whatever your party believes in, and I think that's harmful to all. Really.
It's harmful. Yeah, the single party sort of uni state, no competition, in the legislative process, or no competition allowed. You mentioned Newsom. It's amazing to me that 44%, last poll I saw, of Californians think he's doing a good job. I'm not sure who these people are. I'd like to actually talk to them and what metrics they're looking at. Of course, Newsom is now tacking, it looks like, to the center with his podcast. He's talking to Bannon and Kirk and all of these individuals with more conservative points of view. Um, do you think it's blatantly obvious to the populace what he's doing with his repositioning? Or no?
Yeah, it probably isn't. I mean, I worry about this state having good media coverage so people understand, particularly what's happening in Sacramento, which affects them probably more than their local government or their federal government, that state government, and all of those things that are involved. But um, I almost feel this is more who Gavin Newsom started out as opposed to this epiphany of new ideas. Back in my time as mayor, we set up the Big Ten Mayors Caucus or
Mm.
Coalition or whatever. And, a couple times a month, all of the mayors of the 10 largest cities would be on a call and go over some issues or try to agree on signing a letter, me being probably the most conservative of those. So that was fine with me because if they wanted my signature, I was able to pull them a little bit my way. But also on those calls at that moment in time was the mayor of Oakland and Jerry Brown and the mayor of San Francisco and Gavin Newsom. And, we met, we discussed issues. We signed letters that would be, sent to the legislature expressing the point of view of the large cities. And I guess I think from that point to today, one, would there be a letter signed by someone like Gavin Newsom that would reflect that position that could be accepted by Republicans? It was in the past, but also would the legislature even care to read it? So I think there has been a shift in really where voices come from, but also who is receiving those thoughts and responding to them.
That's such a good point. I actually think he's tacking back to probably his original true north. Listen, he started as a business guy,
Right.
Restaurants and hotels, and he came from a fairly privileged family, let's say very privileged family, with a guy who was with a dad, excuse me, who was a major political insider. He's Pelosi's relative, right? So he came from the inside, and I think he's probably showing his true colors now.
Yeah.
And he's played the game in California quite well, hasn't he? But here we are.
Right, exactly. I mean, he might have played it well, but uh, I certainly think he could have played it much better.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
he could have had a much broader coalition of support, which is going to be critical for someone who wants to run for president.
I'm glad you corrected me. When I said played it well, I meant to his own personal advantage for higher office, but not necessarily to benefit the people of California and to bring people together for common sense policies. So thank you for that correction. Let's talk about a subject that's very near and dear to your heart and to mine, given I spent the last decade in real estate, housing. You're probably one of the few leaders in recent California history who's gotten a lot of housing built. The Platinum Triangle in Anaheim, where you cleared the way in terms of regulation to bring market rate developers in and market developers to build housing. Imagine that.
Yep, exactly.
Which is what we need to do. Again, you're with the new governor in January of 2027, and he says, "Curt, come sit down with me and advise me. How do we use a combination of executive order and legislative action to clear the way for housing?" I mean, what do we do, Curt?
There's so much that could be done. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we all would want housing to be built with a local focus. So local elected officials make that decision. I think a lot of the locals have abdicated that responsibility by only listening to a handful of folks within their communities and not see the importance of further development within their communities. Part of my, activism on housing is look in, the city of Anaheim that everybody sees as a thriving economic center, mainly based around tourism and hospitality industry. A lot of those jobs are not high-paying jobs. Most of them are middle to low-paying jobs. Those people can't commute to their job.
Of course.
They can't afford that. So they live here, and that's great. We all reap the benefit of people working hard in that industry. Yet, half the one-bedroom apartments in the city are occupied by families. And, even to the point of, and I said this probably 20 years ago, and it's still the case, the house next door to my sister, single-family home in Anaheim, has 3 families living in it.
Mhm.
Just because there's not enough housing doesn't mean there aren't people here that are living here and living in substandard conditions in many cases. Not that the house is substandard, but when you have 15 people living in a
Right.
3-bedroom house, it was built for 3.5 people in, the early 70s. I mean, that is the challenge we have. And, I'm not a sole believer in just build affordable housing so we serve the lower end of the spectrum. I believe that the market system, if you build all the way along the economic spectrum of housing, people will move and move up into those opportunities, be it an apartment today, be it a nicer apartment tomorrow, be it the ability to afford a home of their own. That's what the California dream should be, and that's what the American dream is. What we've done, though, is, a lot of the housing burden is been placed by the legislature in terms of economic policy, economic laws, CEQA. We all talk about that. Those types of issues are daunting, and much of it needs to be stripped away. I mean, to replace a shopping center with housing, it's a less intense use. A shopping center brings in more traffic. It has a lot more activity on the street. People are coming and going all times of the day, but yet that apartment building or those condos or townhomes have to go through a whole CEQA process
Right.
just to replace something that was already there. Silly. In this talk of, all right, how do we control housing, talk on the state level primarily, the state building code has changed almost every year and a half, 2 years. Through all of this discussion of how do we build more housing, the last building code that went into place focused solely on climate change issues. Let's put in EV charging stations. So a builder of an apartment has to have every third or fourth parking space wider,
Right.
so you can put an EV parking or charging station in the future. You've got to build a house that is accessible to solar panels today. So all of these new costs to address someone's perceived need of future progress in the state, all of a sudden you put that burden on that builder, and that burden goes on the cost of housing. And I actually had a client earlier this year, after finally 5 years getting his permits, basically told me he's not going to build the project because his costs have gone up so tremendously in the last 18 months. So this isn't something to blame someone in the past.
Mhm.
This is something that is the blame of today, and mainly has been put into place because of these building code changes and impacts. And you could talk about a lot of the affordability laws. I mean, I think the state, local governments, when they want affordability, they should step up and pay for much of that themselves, not put the burden on the private sector. And in fact, that has been one of the greatest drivers of housing costs, is building someone's affordable housing. When you build housing for people that are market rate, not subsidized in any way, you have to be the one subsidizing affordable housing,
Right.
and that adds to the cost of housing for all. I mean, at the end of the day, looking at where are all those cost drivers, I think we need to spend a lot of time on that. So that would be my advice to someone who wants to build housing. Don't just talk or pass a whole bunch of laws out of the state that create some great idea to change a commercial shopping center to an apartment, yet it has to be built with union labor or prevailing wage laws, or you have to have a higher affordable housing set aside component to that. So a lot of those laws that were passed by the legislature haven't or won't be used because they've added a cost addition to that construction for that type of using that law to build housing. So, I mean, stop it, freeze it, roll it back, and then see what housing happens, and it will happen.
Yeah. You said that so well. And what comes to mind listening to all of those different points is let the market work.
Yeah.
Somehow California has lost sight of the fact that we have the best entrepreneurs, the most innovative people who know how to build things, whether it's rockets. Well, Elon moved to Texas, right? Whether it's rockets or housing.
Yeah.
And developers
But
are.
he moved because of that regulatory
He
component,
moved
right?
because of the regulatory
And,
component.
and therefore, you just can't talk about this little microcosm. You have to look at all that regulation burden. Get 5 housing developers in a room. They'll tell you the 50 regulations that impede housing development at an affordable cost in California.
Yeah, well, let's do that.
Yeah.
And but I'm with you, and I think that again, California is backed itself into this crazy corner, least affordable state. And I gather we can build 1 apartment unit here for every 4 that are built in a neighboring state like Nevada, which is absolutely insane. And it occurs to me that this is a man-made problem.
Yeah.
What are the other worst man-made problems in your view in California right now?
Well, you use the word affordability. I mean, I looked at a recent recitation of all the Democrat candidates running for governor, and affordability was like the number one buzzword coming from them. And hey, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think that should be the number one focus every politician has.
Right.
And that is affordability, because affordability runs the gamut, not only where you can live, where your kids can live, where your parents can live as they age through the process or grow into the ability to live in a home as your college age kids will do. You want them to live in the state. You want them to be able to live by you. Also, those entrepreneurs, when you talk about regulatory restrictions and challenges, people to start up a business here. I mean, hey, I'm a small business, a consulting firm, under 10 employees, but the amount of regulation in terms of HR or the new impacts that are put on me as a business person, even of a small firm, let alone a medium-sized or large firm, California puts far more regulatory burden on them. But as you're coming up here, you mentioned the price of gas across the street. That's a man-made challenge of
Yes.
California. I mean, go to any neighboring state, but more importantly, go the next circle away from neighboring states, and not only will you see the gas prices so much cheaper, you'll see energy prices in general so much cheaper. And you have to say, well, why is that? Why is California so unique? Because we've passed laws to make us unique. And those laws that have made us unique have restricted power generation here. They also have increased the cost of gasoline. I predict the word affordability will be used more on fuel prices and gasoline in the next year than it's going to be used for housing, because the price of gasoline is going to go up tremendously. As you see one or two of the 5 remaining refineries go offline that only can produce gas for California because of our high standards that were imposed by the legislature, you will see the price of gas go up tremendously. And then when someone drives to Nevada or even to Texas, they'll say, why? And it's a self-imposed requirement in California.
It really is. It's shooting ourselves in the foot. I read an article recently about the mayor of Benicia. They've got a big refinery that is about to leave. And of course, he's begging them to stay a couple more years,
Right.
which is ironic. And of course, these policies hurt the people who can least afford to be hurt by them.
Right.
Working poor, working class, even middle class people who cannot afford to live near where they work, which is really
Right.
a crying shame.
Or the small business person that relies upon their gas-powered pickup truck.
Yes.
That might be a 1980, 1990 version of one, but
Right.
they're making a living because of their hard work, and now they're, the EV mandate that may or may not stay in California. But the point of the matter is, all of those people that have to transfer out of the product that they're using to eke out a living,
Right.
they're being told they can't use that anymore.
Right. That's another shame. The nanny state in full effect, telling us what we can and can't do. It reminds me of when Mayor Bloomberg in New York years ago legislated the big gulp. Right.
Yeah,
He wanted to
right.
tell people they couldn't buy a big soda. So just let us live our lives. Let's talk about another area that really is a human rights and civil rights area, which is education. So we have, a very powerful teachers union, and we know how much money they spend influencing politics. And yet we have some of the worst outcomes in the country, particularly for minorities, kids of color, which is
Right.
the crying shame. We're talking to a bunch of experts on the subject of education in this podcast. What's your current view on the state of play, Curt, with education? What does California need to do to educate our kids, even to be in the top 20 in the country? I think we're number 46 right now.
It really is one of our greatest failures. I mean, you even roll back just a couple of years, during the COVID time and all the remote learning. I ran a program here when I was mayor called the Mayor's Tech Scholar Program, which we provided laptops and internet connectivity to sophomores in high school that were focused on going to college. And, one of the requirements is I had to write an essay as to why this was important to them. But at that point in time, certainly that was, 20 years ago. But the point of the matter is most all of the essays said we have one computer in our house and there's 3 kids living here. And when my mom comes home, or when my dad comes home from work, they use the computer. We can't finish our homework. And then I just, since that's embedded in my head, so for 7 years, we did that program, and those essays for 7 years reflected almost the same issue every time. Then we go into a COVID crisis and we say, okay, work from home. All I could think about is every one of those kids, 3 kids and a mom living in an apartment in Anaheim being told, okay, all of you have to go online to do your classwork. And that's probably why about half the kids in LA Unified never went online at all after COVID came into place for the rest of that school year. So yes, we're going to close down the schools, and then all of a sudden, everybody is just like us. We have computers at home. No, that's not true. I mean, we didn't look at the affordability or the access issues. We let other things, such as we got to keep every kid who Very few kids suffered from COVID in any severe way, but we put them in a disadvantage even further.
Right.
But I think that's really reflective of how the state has operated for many, many years. I mean, be it the control of the teachers union or be it this, esoteric principle that the way it's being done now is good. We just need more money to advance it. Yet, finally it's being discussed nationally that we spend more money on education per kid than nearly any other state in America. Money is not the answer. It's having access to good education and allowing for that. I mean, yes, when I was Speaker of the Assembly, we passed probably the first time and only time ever in California out of one house of the legislature, a opportunity scholarship, a voucher program. And it basically was for low-income kids in failing schools, and they could take half of the money and go to a private school or another school of their choice. And in that bill passing out of the Assembly, yes, we had a majority of Republicans there. That's why I was Speaker. But there were 3 Democrats that voted for that bill that year. And, all 3 of them came from minority communities that understood, we aren't allowing the best, or the best teachers aren't necessarily staying in some of those more challenging school districts. When we passed class size reduction in 1996, the largest influx of money in California to schools to go to reduce class sizes. One thing we missed is that the LA Unified Teachers Contract said that if there's openings to new spots, that seniority allowed those teachers to move to where they want. So here, a good thing of saying, hey, let's reduce class sizes became a bad thing for low-income neighborhoods because a lot of the experienced teachers left and they got some of the first time or the emergency credentialed teachers and things like that. In other words, we've only battled in this space to say, how do we make the old system work better? And we can't. We need to really throw out much of the old system and try new things, mainly to help the kids in communities that presently have failing schools.
Would you abolish the superintendent of schools position at the state level? Do you think it's a useful position, or is it a blocker, or is it a shill for the union?
It's always going to represent the voice of the unions, in my opinion, because who spends money to elect someone to those positions? It's those that have a need to control it or to ensure their voice is heard. I mean, I wish business people would step up and say, we're going to overwhelm the state and fund business-oriented candidates that are willing to turn over the table in that office, particularly to save our kids and save education in California. But you really haven't seen that occur, that the business tech community says, okay, we need education. We need a few very clear sectors to be strong, yet the teachers union still outspend everybody and get who they endorse and want in that position.
Curt, do you think that movement can happen anytime soon? I mean, we have a cycle coming up in 2026. There's so much at stake.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't the business community step up to fund that kind of change for those kinds of candidates?
Well, I don't want to put them on the spot and then give them an excuse, but almost every office is in the same fashion, right? I mean, yes, you want a governor that understands business principles or education principles. And I'll just say that, you can look at education in LA, the city of LA, the only time there was a uptick in student scores and outcomes was when Antonio Villaraigosa was mayor.
He stood up to them, to the union.
He stood up to them, and they spent a lot of money to ensure he lost to Gavin Newsom. So was that a message to Democrats that they better not, challenge the teachers union or the education status quo? Or is that a playbook to business community and others? You've got to find people, both Republican and Democrat, who are willing to do that, and you can't leave them hanging.
Right.
You got to, support them through that process.
Right. I want to take a quick time out and remind our viewers and listeners to subscribe to the show and follow us so you don't miss another great episode like this conversation with the mayor or the speaker or both. Let's talk about a couple other issues that are so important in the state of California. I've read recently the majority of Californians support the idea of voters needing a government-issued ID at the point of voting to actually successfully count a vote. Do you think this issue has legs in 2026 in California?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's critical. So there's two sides of this equation. People who do not have faith in the voting system, and they would get much more faith in the system itself if there was a voter ID program in place. The flip side is people say, "No, no, everything's fine. There's nothing wrong here." Then the question has to be, what is the problem then with showing some identification when you register to vote or when you do go to vote in person? What is the challenge of that? People would say, well, it's discriminatory to minority community members. I just think that's an insult to people coming from any minority community, that they are somehow different from all people, that they don't have ID or a government issued ID. Of course they do. And there's always going to be a workaround to that government issued ID if, in fact, there is a very unique case, but those would only be the most unique. So I think part of this isn't just to say, okay, there should be a partisan line, or there should be this should be somehow a partisan battle. I think it is voter integrity, and to make sure that we are, a leader on ensuring we have integrity within the voting process. And I think everybody should be able to rally around that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I interviewed David Tangapaw recently, who entered the legislature last year as the youngest member, like you started out, one of the youngest. He came from one of the toughest neighborhoods in California growing up in Sacramento, and he said his quote was, the soft bigotry of low expectations, right? We're putting this label on certain communities that they can't actually get an ID.
Right.
And he gave the example of his mom, whom he sponsored to get her ID and get in line to be a citizen. And he described her journey, and he said she doesn't speak any English, and yet she could do it.
Yeah.
So, our citizens are smart. Can we finish with some rapid fire?
Sure.
One word, one thought. You're king for a day. The single biggest thing you do to make California better.
Oh, okay. One word. Build housing.
Build housing. 2 words, 2 important words.
Sorry.
That's good. That's good.
Or I'll say build. How's that?
Build. Build, baby, build.
Yeah, exactly.
3 words. Is there a California leader, past or present, you really respect, and why?
Oh, I would put Pete Wilson high on that list. And hey, when I was elected to the legislature, came from the more conservative wing of the Republican Party, and he was more in the moderate wing. But there's nobody that I saw through politics that worked harder and understood the process, and was willing to cut a deal when he had to, but also stand tough when he needed to. So I very much admire that.
And what gives you hope we can fix the state?
The people in the state.
I like it. People comes up most often when I ask that question, and I completely agree. What do people get wrong about California who don't live here?
That I don't know. Do they get it wrong? But that the weather really is worth it.
That's very well said. And then last one, California is fill in the blank.
The Golden State.
Yeah. From your mouth.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
Great to meet you, and thank you for the time and all your insights. Really appreciate it.